Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel we have Dan Shapir.
Hello from a very warm Tel Aviv.
We also have Steve Edwards.
Hello from a sunny and clear Portland. And Dan, I must say that last week I was down in Arizona at my parents', and I think the weather was more like where you are.
Well,
You know.
I assume Arizona is drier.
Oh yeah,
Tel
very
Aviv
dry.
is on the coast, so yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah, it's very, very dry there, like 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, my son's on a mission in South Carolina, and he was talking about how it gets hot there
And
it's different
humid.
from hot here. And I'm like, yeah.
And humid there, yeah.
Yeah. When I lived in Italy, that was the case too. It was much more humid there. I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and this week we have our friend Hadar here. Do you want to introduce yourself, or does Dan want to introduce you? I don't know.
Dan, go for it.
Yeah, I can go for it, definitely. So my name is Hadar Geva, and I'm the CTO and co-founder of Myop.dev, a pretty small startup company. Currently at Tel Aviv. Originally, in the past year and a half, living in Thailand. Currently visiting family and friends here in Tel Aviv.
Where have you been in Thailand?
In the islands, Samoi, Koh Phangan. Took some break
My daughter
after...
just spent 2 years. My daughter just spent 2 years in Chiang Mai. I went and visited her there a little while ago, but that's up farther north.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It sounds exotic, which means I want to travel there someday. But
It's
You should.
And you ain't
Especially-
heard nothing about heat and humidity till you go there about this time of
Yeah,
year.
for
let me
sure.
tell you.
No,
I
but
don't know,
it's really nice when you're combining like our kind of jobs with the tech industry, doing what you know to do with these exotic places and kind of not so developed countries. I found it like a really nice match.
Digital nomad lifestyle, huh?
Yeah.
Good.
Very
good.
cool. So I don't know who wants to introduce the topic. We kind of had some back and forth on the title. So I'm going to let somebody
Yeah.
else do it because I think I would screw it up.
Dal, you wanna set the stage? I think that would be best.
Yeah. I think we can talk today about like a mix and match of technologies in the front end area with all what's going on nowadays with the AI, with the multi frameworks, with all the things that's going around with the vibe coding and the builders of the world. And this is also what we're doing in the company. So I found it like interesting. So yeah, let's dig in.
Yeah, it's funny because as it happens, I'm literally dealing with that at the company that I'm working at SciSense, where we have this like an overarching framework or view that's like a tabbed view of shows certain parts of the application. We are a business intelligence application, so you've got a modeling view where you specify the data sources and the data sets that you're working with. You connect to various external databases. That's one view. And then you have an analytics view where you build all sorts of dashboards and stuff like that. And they're all implemented as like tabs in the main page. But in reality, what they are distinct, effectively web applications. And that main framework loads when you enter a specific view, it needs to load that view on demand. And that view might be implemented in various different frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the modeler is implemented in React. The analytics one is kind of legacy. We're in the process of replacing it. The current one is still implemented in Angular. And there are other views implemented in other things. And even the customer can add their own custom views that they can implement in whatever they want. So that seems to be exactly the scenario that you're talking about.
So in that scenario that you're presenting, how you actually implemented it?
Well, one of the reasons that I'm currently looking at it is that it was implemented in a legacy sort of way several years ago. So it was a hand-built kind of framework, effectively, built using native JavaScript and DOM operations. They kind of based it on the now defunct Google Closure library, but they mostly did it by hand. And I'm looking at ways to modernize it, and I'm thinking about effectively looking at the possibility of re-implementing the whole thing in React.
Yeah. So it sounds familiar. Like a lot of companies facing these kind of issues, either creating like a manually bridges, like you mentioned, like understanding, all right, our host application is React or Angular, and now we need the other one. So let's bridge between them, which lead to, first of all, a lot of time spending, right? You need to invest in creating those bridges, version specifically, most of the time, right? When React 19 or 20 publish, you need to fix your API and do whatever things. Or another variant of implementation that I'm hearing a lot is like loading kind of micro frontend in iframes, right? This is another things that going on for.
The problem with with using, so one option is like you said, iframes, but that creates a really rough separation. It's much more difficult to pass data back and forth. You don't just pass props into a component, for example.
Exactly.
But it does, like you said, it does create a much like more hard and clear separation between the container and the containee. Another option that used to be talked about a lot, I'm hearing about it less, is web components. That you wrap the internal thing in a web component, you create the separation that way, but they actually still live within the same frame. So it's less of a segregation between the two. And you can do all sorts of things with the module federation, I guess, and even the built-in import mechanism that you have in modern browsers.
Yeah.
And if you look at advanced loaders like Vite and stuff like that, they can do a lot of the heavy lifting for you as well.
So I
just to finish, the legacy code that I'm looking at, they actually did this the kind of an old school way. They didn't go with iframes. Instead, they kind of forced the scripts that you want to load to be placed in a very hard-coded sort of way in certain folders and using certain names. And that way it basically just creates script tags on the fly and loads it this way. Yeah, Chuck, sorry for interrupting you.
No, it's fine. The question that I have with this, because it seems like, these are all solutions to, okay, we kind of started in this way, maybe using a framework or inventing our own framework. And then, we realized that we might be able to be more productive or get more of what we want or whatever from another framework. And then, maybe you're segregating between versions because there are reasons why you can't upgrade the one piece to the other piece to the same version of whatever you're using, Angular or React or whatever. And then, maybe you start to migrate to use another technology. And so I can kind of see how you would wind up cobbling this together. My question is that are there people that do this on purpose without having all the historical stuff where they're saying, you know what, we need a little bit of this from React and a little bit of this from Vue, or a little bit of this from, one of the other, maybe some of the smaller frameworks. And so, they blend them on purpose to get some mix of what they actually need? Or is it almost exclusively the other thing where it's, we've got a ton of legacy code and we don't have the time to migrate it all?
So from my perspective, I think it's mainly the second thing. It's not must to be legacy, but even companies that, bought other companies or integrated with other projects, or companies that decided, I don't know, to implement, like to move to a new framework, and the kind of a legacy is not too old, but now they want to share component and experiments and UIs between those two. The one exception that I can.
Sorry, just to mention that it can even be different versions of the same framework. Like if you're a large enough organization, one group might already be on React, 19, and another one is still stuck on React 17, and it might be problematic to run them both in the same page.
Yeah, I mean, I could see the same thing in the Vue world, where the transition from Vue 2 to V3 was fairly substantial. Even though, Vue 3 has backwards compatibility for the options API. But, if you were going to make an upgrade like that, it would be a substantial thing. So it's perfectly not out of the question, to think of Vue 2 versus Vue 3. in
Mhm.
that ecosystem.
So is there ever a reason to do this on purpose?
So the one exception that I can say in the area that we are now experimenting is that more people or more machines start generating code. And I'm referring to the AI, right? So let's say that now you have a Vue.js application and you are fine with it. Everything works great. But then you go to Gemini, for example, and asking to generate some component. Gemini exclusively said, I cannot generate Vue components. I can do it in React or in pure HTML. And now what you are doing, you are stuck. You either get the output as an inspiration. All right, I generated something really quick, but now I need to rewrite it in my framework, which is Vue. And by the way, same go with Angular, same go with Svelte, right? Which can be a great choice for some companies and some projects, but now the AI limit them. So I think in this scenario, you can, in purpose, want to mix and match.
Wait a minute. So let me go back to you saying that there's some AI models that can write code in some frameworks, but not the other?
Yeah.
Well,
I was going to say, my experience with this is not that it can't. It's that some of the models do better with some languages or frameworks than others. And so if you're trying to vibe code yourself something and you want to do it in Angular instead of React, since it's been trained on so much more React, since that's kind of the dominant framework, you may not get great results from the Angular, and it may take more work in order to make it work. If you're not familiar with Angular, you may not recognize that it's giving you garbage or giving you something that won't entirely work. So I could see that being an issue too. But that's my assumption, is that, yeah, it's not going to tell you, I don't know Angular. It's just going to give you something that isn't as refined.
I've yet to encounter
Gemini,
a situation. I've yet to encounter a situation where a model told me, I don't know.
Right?
Usually it tells you, here you go, and
Oh.
it gives me something
It'll-
that's totally wrong.
It
Oh,
tells
yeah,
walkers all
it'll
the
make
time.
things up. Yeah, it will make things up rather than admit that it doesn't. I saw a news story, along those lines. I saw a news story recently where a judge had to punish an attorney because he submitted a brief that was obviously written in AI, and it had submitted, rather than say, there's no cases here to back this up, it had generated cases from the past that didn't exist. It was obvious that he just did this in AI and submitted and didn't even bother to do any research to make sure that these cases that were referenced in supporting documents even existed.
Well,
So, and it's like, so AI, it seems like it's programmed to not be able to say, sorry, I don't have anything here, but instead it makes something up. And that's not the first story I've heard about that.
Well, you have to realize that the large language models, they don't function by saying, what do I know? And then how do I tell you? It functions by saying, you gave me this prompt. Here's what I think the first word's going to be. Here's what I think the next word's going to be. And it just keeps going. Okay, given that I wrote the last paragraph, here's what I think the next word's going to be, right? And so it takes what it's already written and then what's the most recent thing that it's written, and it just kind of continues to build onto it. And so what it essentially did in that case is it said, it had been trained on all this stuff. And so it just assumed the next model or the next token in it is as stated by this case, right? And so then it fills it in. And so it makes it up because it's just predicting that next token. And it's not giving you any real information because that's not how it works.
And that obviously means that when you've got more examples of certain frameworks, say React, and fewer examples in another framework, say,
more better examples.
Yeah, Solid or Svelte or something like that. Sometimes it works the opposite, because sometimes when you've got fewer examples, but all the examples are really good. In that case, that's actually a benefit. But in some cases, there might not be examples of the actual thing that you're trying to achieve, and that might be a problem. It will invent something.
I'm not sure I know to explain it, but the scenario that I mentioned actually happened to us a lot with specifically Gemini. Gemini refused to generate components that are not React. And Chuck, all the things that you said are, we know them, like it's how the LLMs work, but probably Google or I don't know, put some extra layer on top of it in order to, I don't know.
Happens too.
Yeah, don't give you garbage or something like that.
That's interesting because I just use Gemini to rewrite some Vue components or to create components with a specific style. And, I said, here, this is what I'm looking for. Give me this. And it did. And, I had to tweak it and modify it and stuff for my needs, but it spit out Vue just fine. Vue 3.
Well,
I
and Google
tried
is
it
the
yesterday.
patron of Angular. So,
yeah. Yep. So weird, but yeah, this is what happened to me yesterday. Preparing for some meetup, talking about Vue, go to Gemini, ask for pretty simple component like a video player, and it's refused. He said, I can give it to you in HTML or in React. I took a screenshot of it and presented it in the meetup later.
Is that what's called framework discrimination? I mean,
maybe.
I'll give that a delayed joke. There we go. Thank
you. We know that certain, in a different context, certain models have certain political orientations. It can be amusing. Anyway, going back to tech. So we have a situation where we have a certain component in a certain framework, let's say, despite a lot of the, let's say the rest even of the application being a different framework, maybe because it's legacy code that we don't want to touch. Maybe because it's two companies merged and one was standardized on one framework and another on a different framework. Or maybe, like you said, because I vibe coded it and that's what the LLM gave me. Whatever the reason, I need to connect code that implement a component implemented in one framework into an web application implemented using a different framework. Okay, what do I do?
So the things that we found the most effective is, again, to mix and match solutions. And you mentioned most of them, like you mentioned the iframe, which is a limitation, which is the communication and the fact that you cannot pass non-serializable object there because you need to use the post message API. And you mentioned the web component, right? Which up until recently, like year and a half or something like that, was really, really limited. Like React didn't fully support it. Vue just supported it fully year and a half ago. By the way, Angular was pretty good in it. But today, with the release of React 19, all the three major frameworks are support web component really well. Like you can really easy take your existing component and wrap them most of the time with the framework helper. Vue publish their own and Angular theirs to wrap it as a web component. Then you are eliminated a lot of hassle because you are talking with a pre-bundle assets. We're taking care of all the loading, all the styling, all the isolation. You can define, and we can deep dive into it, into the different modes, right? With Shadow DOM, without Shadow DOM, open Shadow DOM, close Shadow DOM. But once you render this component, you can pass props in and out. The component still reactive and can manage its own state. And once you write the component as a pure component and not mess with global object or global states, you're good to go and mix and match between them.
So you're suggesting, if I understand it correctly, to take, let's say I want to embed an Angular component inside of a React web application. What you're suggesting is I take the Angular component, wrap it inside a web component, and then host that web component within the React application. Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm saying it's a good way to start. Like, first of all, let's take your scenario. Angular's support, like wrapping it for you. You shouldn't do much. Angular just expose a helper function called to web component. Then you just give it your component, your existing Angular component, with a string attached to it to define the new tag name, bundle this application into a JavaScript. Once you load it, the component will appear every time that this custom tag will append to the DOM. It's not a bulletproof solution, and we can deep dive into the limitations and edge cases, but it's a good way to start.
I was going to ask, what are the trade-offs? Because, it sounds like you get some isolation and nice stuff out of it, but yeah.
So what are the limitations?
What's the downside?
So the downside is that out of the box, you're not getting any module sharing, right? Because if you wrap some component with the Angular, so it's coming with the Angular. So the bundle includes the framework that it depends on. If you're loading only one bundle, it's maybe okay. But if you're trying to build like a robust system with a lot of sources for components, you may ended up by loading Angular multiple times or loading React multiple times, right? So this is one thing that is not coming out of the box. Second thing that popped into my mind is that you need to dip a bit into in order to pass like complicated props, which is not strings, because web components is DOM elements, DOM and HTML is string based. So if you are passing string, let's say name, last name, phone number, you just define it and pass it in the HTML. Once you want to pass functions, objects, callbacks, things like that, you need to start and understand how the mechanism works behind the scenes. But again, it's a gaps that those frameworks closed and covered in the past few months.
To be fair, you can pass, like you said before, you can pass serializable objects by serializing the object into a JSON string. But yes, it certainly does limit you in what you're able to pass back and forth. If you want to pass some sort of a callback, which often you do, because you usually want that particular application to somehow impact its container, that becomes tricky.
Yeah. First of all, totally right. When you're trying to pass functions, stringify will not help you. And on top of that, with a large object, you don't want to always serialize them as a string and then deserialize them, because you're going to harm the performance, right? You want to pass the real object. So again, it's possible, but it's something that you need to understand the mechanism behind the scenes. Like it's a few lines of code, but you need to understand it, how React did it, how Angular did it, how Vue did it. And if you want it to be seamless, like I'm in React hosting Angular component and I just want to paste props in my JSX, you need to understand like the mechanism behind the code.
Okay, so go, Chuck.
I was just going to say, so let's say that I do this, right? And so I start setting this up and I start sprinkling some Angular into my React or, whatever. And I start seeing, it loads Angular 6 times because I've got 6 components in here. Or I start seeing some of these other trade-offs start to rear their heads. How do I start to mitigate that so that it's not so heavy on my application?
Yeah. So you can start really simple and just define that your host applications support an API to load Angular. And then all the bundles will depend on it. So they will arrive without Angular, without the framework, asking the host application to provide it once. This is one option. Then you are keeping yourself the freedom that the host application control everything. If you want to be more robust and agilic with it, you can put in solutions like model federation, right? Which will do it for you and wrap things for you. Again, not a bulletproof solution because model federation, even in the last versions, depends on some kind of notion what's going on at the build time. So the
we've had episodes in the past about model federation, but I think it's definitely worthwhile. It's been a while, so I think it's definitely worthwhile to give at least a brief explanation of what model federation is and how it works.
You want me to go ahead or?
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. Yeah, so model federation is a set of tools. It's a library set of tools that helping us as the developers get into our build as a build step. They started with the Webpack. I think that now they also supported the Vite. And they bring us set of tools to identify and federate models that may be shared or lazy load, identify them as like this, like that, and then extract them into common bundles, which just like Chuck asked, can then be loaded only once. But again, it's come with limitations because in order to do so at build time, you need to know what's going on at build time. So now if I want to mix and match components, I maybe need to organize them in one monorepo, which really limits me, right?
So just to clarify, going back to model federation, per my understanding, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, model federation is basically taking the concept of dynamically loaded modules and enhancing them with a sort of a global lookup table, as it were, to ensure that when I load a particular module, I only load it the one time and I share it across all the code or components that actually need it, rather than having each and every one of them load the module independently. So basically, the module is loaded only once, and then I just get the reference to the already loaded module, rather than each time loading it again and again, and at the very least rerunning the initialization code and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that it's kind of supported by the bundler that I'm using, maybe with a plugin or extension or something, so that I don't have to think about it. It's kind of done automatically for me, that it identifies this distributed reuse and hooks up everything automatically for me, that my code just assumes that it's a regular package that I'm using and there's nothing special about it. Is that more or less an accurate description from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that by default they are not identified as globally, as you mentioned. It's an option that it's really easy to plug in. It's not the default behavior, but yeah, it's definitely part of your build step running on your application while it's being bundling and replacing like the imports. And instead of putting them inside your bundle, let you the ability to load them from remote, right?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that one option is to use model federation in order to avoid the reloading of common resources, and in this way make management easier because it also finds the resources for me. I don't have to worry about putting the resources with special names and special places. It does all the wiring for me automatically.
Yeah. And in the case that you are going to load a lot of bundles that may share dependencies, it can bring you benefits. Yeah, definitely. Again, not so easy to get those results because you need to know in advance at build time what's going on, or to manage a lot of building hints for that. If those code chunks are not sitting together, you can still achieve it, but you're gonna end up messing a lot with configuration and hinting JSONs, telling the model federation that assuming this.
Okay, and module federation is usually something that I get, well, not totally for free, but I get it from the bundler that I'm using.
Yeah, but in my perspective, it's far from free. It's really hard to integrate with. Like it's working and it's working very well, but it's not easy to integrate. Developers that I'm talking to struggling a lot with putting model federation into their project and use it efficiently.
Why is that?
So
I think there are several reasons for that, but I think that the deep understanding of what's going on your bundler in order to use model federation is something that most of the developers nowadays are not invest time in, right? You are creating the project, you're putting the infrastructure. Maybe it's not even you that did it, and it's happened months ago, and then you need to do something, but you already have, I don't know, Tailwind plugin there, and you have CSS modules, and you have a bunch of things there, and you need to come and reopen the infrastructure and understand the build step and the bundling steps. And as I mentioned, maybe you need to now reorganize your code into a big monorepo and share dependency between them. And maybe you don't even understand how monorepos works. So developers that I'm talking to understand the benefits of model federation. I personally think it's a great tool, right? But it's hard to adopt. It's not something that you're just taking out of the shelf, putting in your project, and it works.
So I guess the question that I have is, as we kind of go through how to do this, are we going to be talking more about, okay, well, first, you take the step to, wrap your stuff in web components, and then you solve this problem with model federation, then you solve this other thing that might come up with some other tool, technique, or thing? Or is there another better way that I guess, you said your first step is to, separate things out into the components. But, is there like an alternative strategy that we're eventually going to bring forward? It's where it's, hey, if you run into this or you get past this, then maybe you consider just doing this other thing altogether as opposed to this. So I guess my question is are we going to just keep fixing the strategy we're on, or is there an alternative that we're going to eventually explore?
Yeah, so a great question. And I think, as I mentioned, there is several solutions. None of them are the golden one, but we found the mix and match the best approach. So web component is one really robust one. Once you get into the right tooling around it, we can deep dive into the problem if we wish and talk about more things there. But I can also talk about another approach that we are play with, which work really nice and solving what Dan just mentioned before with the iframes. So Dan talked about loading like a kind of a micro front end or sub parts of the page in an iframe, which give us a really good isolation, right? We shouldn't deal with global object, with CSS, with everything. But then we're limited to the objects that we can pass between the sites, right? Due to the API of post messages and course origin and all of these. But think about what if we can generate iframes in our domain dynamically, right? Without server involvement. If we can have something on the client side that can generate iframes, or what I call local frames, which actually be an iframe on our domain with the UI part that we wish to isolate, right? So we're gonna get the benefits of iframe, all the isolation, right? But without the limitation of not being able to pass data in and out, because iframes in the same domain can be interactive both ways without serializing the objects.
Yeah, I think it's worth explaining this distinction. When you've got a page hosting an iframe, that iframe can be a page from the same domain and obviously can be a page from a different domain. It's totally valid and legal, and in fact, something that happens a lot. Now, when the iframe is from a different domain, the containing window object cannot look into that iframe, and the code in the iframe cannot look out. And the only way in which they can send message back and forth is via the mechanism you mentioned before, Hadar, which is post message, which is in an asynchronous mechanism. It's kind of similar to events, to DOM events, but it's asynchronous versus synchronous. And you're limited to what you can send as a post parameter, which is essentially a string serializable object or a byte array. It can also be a byte array. But that means that if you want to pass an object in or out, you kind of need to first serialize it either into a string or into some sort of array of bytes, then send those, and then deserialize the data and deal with it. It's kind of similar to how you send stuff back and forth between, web workers. If you send in stuff into web worker, it's essentially the same restriction, the exact same sort of mechanism. On the other hand, if the iframe is from the same domain, then you can look into that iframe from the outside, and also from within, you can look out. So you can, let's say from within, you can look at the window.parent, get to the parent DOM and domain, and basically call functions directly and pass whatever you want. Now, it does create all sorts of interesting things, like arrays are not necessarily always identified as arrays and other funny stuff like that. But generally speaking, you can pass JavaScript objects back and forth without a problem.
So this scenario, by the way, yep.
And it's synchronous, which is also important.
Yep.
So one question I have with this is, you said you could do it without involving the server. So I'm kind of curious how you pull that off.
It's totally client side. It's code. It's one JavaScript function calling another JavaScript function. It's like you call JavaScript functions within the same page.
No, I think Chris is curious how you load an iframe.
Charles.
without server involvement. And yeah, this is an interesting technique, but it's possible to actually, if you already holding or have access to a document content, let's simplify it to an HTML page. If you have the string on your hand, you can on client side create a frame and inject it to it, right? Without server involvement. Iframes that you will create on the client side automatically will be treated as self-domain, same domain. Yeah.
It's
And
a technique that we used to use. Yeah, it's a technique we used to use a lot in the old days when the DOM was not as dynamic and you had all sorts of restrictions and what you could do inside the page. The way to kind of get around it was to create iframes and put whatever you wanted into them. So it's a reuse of an old technique.
Yeah.
So I can kind of see that, the web component approach is kind of a quick and dirty thing. It's definitely simpler than this other technique. So, yeah, is there a library that does this, or is there some other? Do I have to kind of go and invent it? How do I do that?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we're dealing with those issues a lot in Myop, our company, and we're providing tools also for that. We're suggesting different solutions for different needs. And for iframe treatment, we have all those kind of tools. We solve the communication issue, so we can pass data in and out with the same domain or with different domain. We're taking care of executing functions and automatically serialize the response and request for you. We also created a mechanism to create a component kind of API by under the hood render local frames and register for things inside them. And I can mention, maybe it's interesting, in which use cases we see it's relevant to use. And I agree with Dan, this all kind of old technique. I think that taking an HTML and just wrap it in a frame and then communicate with it can be really relevant when you want to take like the now pretty messy generated code that all those vibe coding tools can give you, right? All those Gemini, GPT, Claude, and just in a matter of seconds, turn them into components which you can, first of all, communicate in a safe way, right? But also you can be trusted that whatever the AI did on the global object, on the window object, on whatever, will not affect your application, right? Because you wrap it inside an iframe. Yeah. So it's,
Is
again,
that
it's
the
not...
main advantage? When I compare this technique, so we mentioned before the technique of using just web components with a shadow DOM, for example, for if we need enhanced segregation between the component content and the external web application. So what's the advantage of using this sort of self-created iframe over using a web component? Is it the fact that you've got more significant segregation between the codes? Or are there additional advantages as well?
Yes. So web components, even in the usage of closed shadow DOM, are actually encapsulating mainly the DOM and the CSS. The JavaScript is still running on the same realm and can still access global objects, right? So if, for example, I went to, any outsourced coder, it can be a developer that's not working in my company, it can also be AI tool. And he took the window.title and changed it. Even if I wrap it in a web component, it will actually gonna change my document title. And once I wrap it in an iframe, it will be limited to the iframe that I give him, right?
They can still, obviously, if they do window.title, they'll update the iframes title, which effectively nobody sees, and that doesn't create any problem. But if they are malicious, then they can do window.parent.title and get at the actual title. So it seems to be less about malicious code and more about avoiding accidental functional leaks. Or am I missing the point?
No, you're totally getting the point, and this is why it's not so simple.
It minimizes
to implement.
The collisions between the two.
Yeah. I can tell you that in our solution, of course, we tackle this issue, and the object and the access that we are allowing to execute inside these local frames is limited. limited to what the user configures in our dashboard. So yeah, you're definitely right. And again, we're not.
So you create this kind of separation that might not necessarily automatically exist.
Yeah. Again, there is no 100% guarantee.
You could do something like override the window.parent, I guess, or something along these lines.
Right. And allow to pass only what agreed before, right? Only what agreed to be the contract of the component, which later on wrapped nicely as props, right? And then from the host perspective, I maybe know that it's an iframe if I'm the one that created the component or if I look into the DOM. But in terms of the way that I'm writing my JavaScript, it's really straightforward. It's component.load, and then I'm getting a component and I can pass props in and out, right? And even if the component inside try to do something malicious, again, not 100%, but in most of the cases, we can block it because we already mocked and monkey patch the specific object that can lead to those issues.
Yeah, I'm imagining that there are probably a wide array of reasons why you may or may not need the tooling that you're offering from your company. I mean, if it's all internal and, I can mostly just use this technique with the developers that work for me, and there's a certain level of trust, then, maybe I don't need all of the isolation, and I can kind of build the tools in that I need. And then, if I go beyond that and I feel like I do need some of these features, then I could go and pay for a product, which is something that I find with a lot of programming, right? And so at some point it's like, okay, look, the trade-offs are just, it just makes sense to pay for this. My question is, so if I started implementing this myself and I start putting some of these features together, what's kind of the bare bones reality of using this? Like what kinds of things am I going to have to build into it to get it to work without necessarily having to go to a paid tool?
So I think we talked about some of those issues, right? We touched some of those things with the web components. We touched some of it in the terms of creating iframes, local frames and iframes. And I think it really depends on what you are willing to build, right? Like you will face or not face specific issues based on whatever how advanced is your need, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think you brought up a particular. Sorry,
I was specifically curious about the local frames and just, so if I decide to implement local frames,
so I can mention
things to just reach into it, to talk to it.
So I can mention some like really, really things that probably will need to solve. So as Dan mentioned, once you're implementing an iframe that's sitting on the same domain, you can access the parent and can access the inner document object, but you're not really want to, right? You want to work with props and ref and have types and everything, right? You probably want some kind of a lifecycle of a component, right? Which may be different from the lifecycle of the document inside the web page that you load. So you need to create some kind of an API and a mechanism to make it for you, right? You want to have like a kind of on mountain, right? Which is not necessarily the DOM loaded, the document unloaded, right? Inside the component. Maybe there is more things happening there. Lazy load there, states, loading things. So you want to be able to have on mount function. And then you want to pass props and be able to catch them on the other side, right? And react to them. Maybe you want to bind specific props, input props into elements on your screen, right? So lifecycle events, on mount, on unmount, things like that is something that you probably will implement by hand if you will not use a library.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically what you're giving it is a component like facade, the services that, the callbacks or the life cycle that we expect to see when working on a component, stuff like on mount, on update, on unmount, stuff like that, which, like you said, don't necessarily easily map into DOM events, even if you're using an iframe.
Right. Yeah. This is one thing that I can just, really straightforward. But I actually want to dip a little bit into what you said about the trust between the one that create the component and the one that used the component. And I want to put on the table something that I think is relevant for the AI era, which maybe the other side that creates the component is not a developer, right? Because you said if we trust the developer or not trust the developer, which is kind of a solved issue. We need to trust the developers that we're taking code from, right? We shouldn't go around and around. But what if we want to be able, designers or product managers inside our organization, let's start by that, to create components, right? So they're not know how to code, right? The product manager will not contribute React component for us, right? But it can vibe code something, right? And while you vibe code something, maybe there is risk there. It can be performance risk. It can be security risk. It can be global states risk, not necessarily malicious things, but maybe things that he made by mistake. Maybe it's something that the tool lead him to do, right? Messing with, I don't know, with the global object, messing around with the, I don't know, mocking critical functions, things like that. So the question of trust changing a bit if we want to put more roles into the ones that creating components, which I found really, really interesting and really something that's going to happen while the AI becoming more and more. Because product manager and designer already creating mocking and things with vibe coding, right? A designer are using Figma to code and start animating and playing around with their designs. But maybe the gap between taking this mock into production is not that big as we see it if we put the right tools and right checks on top of that, right? Because at the end, they generated valid HTML and valid JavaScript, right?
You're saying the greater isolation is required because the code that was vibe coded by somebody who's not necessarily a developer, if it runs in the exact same context and the exact scope and the same permissions that the container code is running in, that can create all sorts of not even necessarily malicious security issues. It's more about potentially just collisions because it's a question of the quality of the generated code.
Yeah. And I'm suggesting this kind of model because we're seeing how the AI is progressing and it's progressing very, very nice. But until we can, just put cursor into our IDE and it will do everything, I think that we can already start using the AI output, not just for mocking or prototyping. We can start and take some of it output and use it in specific use cases in production.
Okay. And for that, in your opinion, the optimal solution are those self-created iframes?
No. So I already told, like the mix and match. In most of the cases, in our case, we're analyzing the component. Once we get the component from AI, we're analyzing it. And then if it can fit the web component structure, we're preferring the web component, right? Because web component server side, okay. the web component can get like better performance because they're running on the same realm. Web components can extract and extend their visual scope out of the rectangle, right? There are several benefits of using web components. But we know, and I'm putting it on the table, that not all the outputs from AI can fit this specific model. And then we need to extend the solution and also in some cases use local frames.
So can you give like one example of where your analysis might look at the generated code and decide, hey, I'm not going to use a web component, I'm going to use an iframe instead? Can you give such an example?
That's what I was going to ask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great minds think alike.
So the easiest
because I'm
is
imagining that you could also have a competent developer do this in a lot of cases.
Yeah. So we're doing a bunch of checks and analysis there, but the easiest one to describe and talk about is like, first of all, we're looking for how much global object interactions is inside a component, right? How much touches of window, document, and things like that, the component, the code is actually doing. We're also looking for an HTML tags, which are not valid inside web components. For example, the HTML tag, right? Or the head tag. We then looking inside those tags and try to understand what's going on there. If we add an empty head tag, maybe we can just drop it and the component will act the same. But if in the head tag there is style loading, fonts loadings, or things like that, maybe it should be inside an iframe so the fonts will be loaded correctly, right? Another technique that we can do, again, not in runtime, but on analysis time, is render the component both in iframe and in web component and look for the difference and understand, all right, from the original inputs, what are the outputs when we render it in a web component and the browser already remove whatever is not supported versus an iframe, which support everything, right? And this is even before we're asking AI to analyze the AI, right? Of course, with this, we can play for, I don't know, months, right? Asking the AI to analyze the output of the AI. But I'm just talking about analysis that we're doing like traditional way, right?
Yeah, I love AI inception. To take us off topic for a little bit, I recently created the rule files for some projects for use with Cursor. And obviously, the step before last is to tell Cursor, hey, look at the rule file, try to make it better. It's the step before last because the last step still needs to be you going over the rule file and making sure that it says whatever you want it to say. But yeah, there's definitely that inception thing of using AI to analyze the output of AI. So I guess that's definitely something that you can and should do as well, is that what you described is code that was perhaps generated by AI, scan that using AI to make certain decisions and maybe modifications. Because you know that it's going to be used in a somewhat different context than maybe the original creator explained to the AI that generated that code initially.
So we're kind of coming up on our time limit. I just want to make sure that we're covering anything else that needs to be said if people try to implement any of these strategies.
You know, we can talk again. I'm working on it for more than a year. Of course, we cannot cover everything, but I think if we want to the audience to take some things to keep in mind from this talk is that don't be afraid to mix and match. Don't be afraid to try, right? Especially in the area that we are at. Rewrites are something that becoming less and less acceptable, right? And code start being generated really, really quick. So try and use.
Yeah,
Dan is not so.
Yeah. Here's the thing.
It's interesting watching his body language. He's like,
yeah. No, but I have two issues with what you said. First, about the mix and match. Mix and match is a great idea when you're productizing it. When you're creating a specific solution, particularly for this problem, then you can definitely invest the effort in achieving a best of breed type solution. But when you're building a homegrown solution, generally you'll just go with what works. It's fairly rare that I've seen people creating all sorts of sophisticated fallbacks for homegrown solutions. So that's about that part. The other reason that I was nodding is that I actually think that in the age of AI, we're actually going to be seeing a lot more refactoring that we have seen in the past. It might be problematic refactoring, but it's still refactoring nonetheless. For example, I have used AI to refactor legacy class React components into functional components that use hooks instead. And the AI seems to be pretty good at that. You can even tell it like, take custom logic and move it into a custom hook, and even break a very long component into smaller components that are dedicated to particular tasks and stuff like that. So I think that refactoring is actually getting easier than in the past. Now, you probably want to have a really good suite of unit tests before you do that, because the refactoring that the AI might do might be total junk. But the great thing is that the AI can also generate unit tests for you. So before you start, you tell the AI, hey, look at this code, generate unit tests for it. Obviously, make sure that the unit tests actually pass, because I've seen situations where AI
Tell work, but
generates
I've done
unit
this.
tests. Yeah, it generates unit tests that don't actually pass. Sometimes it can actually be smart enough to run the unit tests, fix them as while they're not passing, tell you, hey, they all passed and now they're good, and then you run it and you find that they don't all pass, which I've definitely seen as well. So be careful with that. But the process that I've seen about refactoring is first generate unit tests. If they don't exist, make sure you've got good coverage, and then tell the AI, hey, refactor my code. You'll probably need to do a lot of manual refactoring afterwards as well, but a lot less than you might have otherwise needed to do. So that's what I'm saying. That's why I was nodding my head when you were saying that we're maybe going to be seeing less refactoring, because I don't necessarily think that's the case.
Yeah,
I
so maybe
agree.
it
I
was.
also want to add that the models are pretty good about picking out patterns. And so if, like Dan said, where you go from a class-based component to using hooks, it can pick those patterns out and then say, this is the logic I need to keep. And then kind of rework the pattern around it. And yeah, some of your more complicated stuff, it's going to kind of gag on a little bit and give you something that isn't quite right. Yeah, a lot of these tools. And the other thing is that I have yet to find an AI system that won't just answer my question, even if it's wrong or partly wrong. And so if I want to stay in Vue or stay in Angular or stay in React, I haven't seen any instance where that's been an issue at all.
Just to answer to relate to what you just said, Chuck, I treat models like a very junior developer that has the confidence of a super senior developer.
That's so true.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
but Hadar, we were kind of hijacked the conversation. So what's your
Way
take
to
on
go,
all of
Dan.
this?
Yeah,
Well, that's our job.
No, it's okay. So I'm totally treating AI and the models, as you said, Dan, like a junior developer with the confidence. And this is why I personally, and this is what I'm promoting, treating its output as something that we need to suspect and we need to isolate and we need to integrate in our products like as someone that we are not
trusting.
Yeah, trusting.
That we're not confident in.
Yeah, and on top of that, and the reason that I'm suggesting to load it dynamically is that because I'm treating these components and these output as something that's going to be changed rapidly. Even if we got a component that now work, probably it's going to be changed again and again and again due to product requirement or due to issues that we will find later. Once we put it in dynamic loading, it's become really easy. And this is why I'm suggesting doing it outside of your project. It will be much more quicker. The AI will have much smaller scope, so the results will be better. And this is what I'm suggesting. This is my take on the current state. Instead of just taking cursor into our project and, I don't know, vibe code with tons of prompts just to get a small change with our conventions and ways of working. And keep in mind also another small thing on that. Remember that as better as cursor become, it's still gonna help us as developers and not the citizen developer that we talked about, right? The designer. Designer will not install IDE and put commits for us. And it may be go to base 44, Lovable, Gemini, and generate components. And in Myop, we're seeing it in live with customers.
Yeah, I really like what you're proposing and what you're saying. The fact that we are much more likely to vibe code an actual standalone application than to vibe code a new component into an existing application, especially an existing legacy application. And if you can create a mechanism that allows us to safely vibe code components and then integrate them into an existing application without being afraid that, the whole thing will backfire and crash our entire thing, then that's certainly something that is valuable. And I think that I'm finally really getting your value proposition, as it were.
So just out of curiosity, how is this different, or is it different from something like Astro that allows you, it's a tool for statically, generating a site, but it has the quote unquote islands architecture that allows you to use a Vue component or an Angular component or React component or Svelte or whatever. What's the comparison contrast between those two, between what you're talking about and what Astro does?
Yeah, so there is similar paradigms there, but there is a lot of difference. Astro doing everything not lazy loaded, right? Like you putting all your code together, you wrap it, you bundle it, you ship it, and it's handling frameworks. Again, it's not, and it exists much before. It's not treating AI outputs or treating a component as something that not a developer can create, right? With Myop, we're first of all putting the lazy loading and the dynamically on top. Everything is dynamically loading and runtime loaded. Resolve and loaded. We skip this part. We also support like segmentation and A/B test due to the fact that we're lazy loading everything. But we also support, we're putting really efforts and look into taking components that's written by non-developers and turning them into developer standard.
Yeah, I think the key difference, Steve, because I think your question is excellent, because there's certainly an overlap. Like you said, with Astro, you can easily load things dynamically. It's just a flag that you put on a component in Astro. You can mix and match different frameworks within the same page. That's all good. What you don't get, though, is that level of isolation between the components on the client side. They all just run within the same page, within the same DOM context. There is no isolation. And consequently, if you've got, one of those components being vibe coded and doing crazy stuff with a window object for some reason, or doing weird things with React that might interfere with other React components on the same page, that's not something that model will necessarily save you.
So then if we're dynamically running and you're talking about lazy loading, always side note, that term always cracks me up. I don't think it's really accurate, but it's more like efficiently loading, if you ask me. But I'm guessing that
from my perspective,
isn't.
I just to say that, software development is that field that teaches you that procrastination is a virtue.
Doing things at the last minute, right? But I'm going to guess
Exactly.
where does SEO concerns come in here? Because the whole point of something like, statically generated or Astro type stuff is that it's available for the bots when they come around. And I know that we've talked to DevRels from Google Search here on this podcast where I've asked that specific question. And they will say, well, it's complex and we really can handle that. But that's always sort of the underlying issue for, if you want to be discovered on the web is the bot's got to be able to find your content. So if you're doing it at the last minute, how does it impact that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I can answer it shortly, that we support also running our dynamically loading, we call it. It's not lazy loading. We also support dynamically loading things on the server side, right? If your component is something that can be rendered on the server side, for example, React bundle or just a pure HTML that you took from one of the models, so we can render it on the server side and put it as part of the document that we're sending. By the way, it's one of the last modification and changes that made into web components, that web components can now be streamed directly from the server and then iterated later. I think it's a year ago or something like that.
All right, I'm going to start heading us toward wrapping up because we're at the end of our scheduled time, and I want to be mindful of if anybody has anything else they need to be at.
Which I do.
Hadar, really quickly, what is it that your company actually offers? Because I'm imagining somebody's listening to this and going, okay, I understand what you guys are talking about. I don't want to figure all this crap out. So what do you give people if they come and use your solution?
Yeah, so Myop.dev is offering like open source, a free meta framework SDK that can be integrated inside any framework, React, Vue, Angular, or Legacy, pure JavaScript. And we offer a SaaS solution, a dashboard to manage all those components with visualization, with ability to manage A/B tests, segmentation, gradual rollout, and rollback. And then we actually monetize on the dashboard, right? For companies that are looking to run inside a closed network, we are offering an on-prem solution. Yeah. So this is kind of the thing. A dashboard that manage and orchestrate micro front-end operation in 2025, right? And a set of SDKs dealing with all of that and solving the issues that we talked about and much more.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's myop.dev. I just went and loaded the page and looked at it, and it looks pretty cool. I think there's a video right there at the front. So if you want more information, you can just click that. Let's go ahead and do our picks and then wrap up. Steve, you said you have something you got to get to. So why don't you go ahead and go first?
Okay. So I got one serious pick before I get to the most important picks. We were talking about web components earlier. And I recently last month, I started a new job doing doing web development and Vue stuff at a new organization. We do internet networking. It's really quite fascinating. But one of the things we're running into is what's typical in a lot of larger organizations is that you have web properties all over the place done by different people and you have different look and feel. I mean, the only thing in common in some of them is the logo in the top left corner, different. One department hired a contractor to do this and somebody did it themselves. And so my department, we've created this whole really great tool for our network engineers to manage all the network infrastructure, and we're looking to expand. And so one of the things my boss really wants to do is to sort of build one system, to borrow from Lord of the Rings, one system to rule them all, one design system, and in the darkness bind them. And so some of our properties are like Drupal and WordPress and different tools. And so we want something that's generic. So we want to use web components. And so one of the things that we're doing is a new library that's come out. I don't know how new it is. It's called Web Awesome. It's created by Font Awesome. It used to be called Shoelace. So a couple people from Shoelace came on the Font Awesome organization, created Web Awesome. They're basically web components that you can drop into any framework. And so the idea being is something that's somewhat generic that we can use across other frameworks and stuff. And I just started playing with it. It's pretty cool. There's a pretty comprehensive set of components that are available. And then we already use Tailwind for the CSS. And so you can just drop Tailwind classes on top of your web components, which you have them in your Vue components in our case. And it's pretty cool. It's something generic and their web components. So just started playing with it, but so far so good. The components list, there's a couple things it would be nice if it had like a data tables, or even just a generic table component, but there's other tools we can incorporate that don't use that. So it's at webawesome.com.
There's first of all, obviously AG Grid if you're looking for something really heavy duty.
That's heavy duty. We don't need it for that. We're looking at something else. There's another one we saw that's generic JavaScript that we're going to try to wrap around that. So
there's also the 10-stack. 10-stack, I think,
Tanner
have a
stuff,
table component. The Tanner.
Yeah, we've talked
stuff.
to Tanner before. We looked at that, and there's a viewport of that. There's also ShadCN. Yeah, there's a few things, but this is what we're going for right now. So it's pretty cool.
Congratulations on the new job, Steve.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really psyched to get to travel quite a bit and do some new stuff. Network engineering is a whole new world, man. The lingo is something, let me tell you. So for the dad jokes of the week, I had them brought up and then I lost them for a second. So I found out that, or I was recently diagnosed that I have a fear of being trapped in a small room with Santa. You could say I have claustrophobia.
Good joke, wrong season.
Well, there's a lot of, believe it or not.
There's Christmas in July.
Exactly. My organization, just a club that I belong to, had Christmas in July on Sunday. We do this, and I've seen other stores that do Christmas in July stuff, the half year away. So it's somewhat relevant. I used to believe in spheres, those round things, but then I realized they're pointless. And then finally, fun fact, I was doing some economic research. Australia's biggest export is boomerangs. It's also their largest import.
Yeah.
So
I've heard a
thank you.
variation on that about my son told me that his friend keeps on ordering boomerangs from Amazon and returning them.
I'll give that a rim shot.
Nice. All right, Dan, what are your picks?
Okay, so one pick that I have, we're always on the lookout for good TV series, and the one that we found is called, it's an anthology actually on Netflix called Criminal. There's Criminal UK, Criminal France, Criminal Spain, and Criminal Germany. So, and they're all in their native languages. It basically takes place the entire episode takes place in police interrogation room. It's like this special unit that specializes in interrogation. And every episode is standalone. It's the same interrogators, but it's standalone in the context that it's a different person being interrogated for a totally distinct crime. And the acting is superb. We especially enjoyed Criminal UK. Very good storylines, amazing acting, and I generally highly recommend it. So that would be my first pick if you're looking for something to watch on TV. The other thing is I was recently, for some reason, reminded of two excellent, funny movies from the relatively early 2000s. One, I'll go by dates. One is Tropic Thunder, if you remember that one, the Ben Stiller movie with a whole cast of actors. It had Robert
So
Downey
politically
Jr.
incorrect, it probably couldn't be made these days.
I've never
Yeah,
seen it.
well, you have
Tom
to.
Cruise has a great guest spot in it that he's pretty famous for.
You kind of
That's
spoiled
pretty
it
funny.
because a lot of people don't even recognize that it's him.
Yeah, totally.
Just to give you context, but yes, it's totally politically incorrect. Just the fact that Robert Downey Jr. plays the entire movie in
Yes.
blackface.
Yes, he's
Yeah.
playing a black character.
Well, he's playing a white actor playing a black character, which is like funny. An Australian white actor playing an American black person, but he's a method actor, so he does it all the time, whether on camera or off. It's really funny. I highly recommend that one. It's excellent. If you've not seen it, I highly recommend it. And the other one is the movie called The Other Guys from 2010, Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg. Also, it's a very funny. It's my favorite Will Ferrell movie by far. It's highly quotable. It's a bit raunchy in some parts, so but I highly recommend it as well. Have you seen it, Chuck?
Which one?
The Other Guys.
The Other Guys?
No.
Wow. I highly recommend you watching both these movies. It's
I see it on TV and replays a lot. So
yeah, it's like there's this part where there are two police officers and they're paired together, and initially they obviously can't stand each other. Well, especially the character played by Mark Wahlberg. So he goes off and then he comes back and said, "I was back there about to what did he say? Badmouth you to the other people, but my dad didn't raise me this way, so I'm going to do it in front of your face." But yeah, it's just this great movie, highly quotable. Friends and I quote it to each other very often, and so I highly recommend these movies as well. And those would be my picks for today.
All right, I'm gonna get going on my picks then. I usually do a board or card game. This time I'm going to do Gnoming Around. It's a grandpa back game, and it's basically a variation on golf, if you've played golf. And in fact, it's got a golf theme to it, but it's got a gnome theme to it as well. Let me see if I can get a link here for people. I'll just link to Grandpa Beck's games, actually. So it's, you basically flip cards over and replace the cards in front of you in a 3x3 grid, and you're trying to get the lowest score. So there are negative numbered cards, there are plus numbered cards, and anyway, it's a fun one for sure. It's something that's simple enough that my kids can play it. I guess I better find the Board Game Geek weight, but I'm guessing it's somewhere just above 1. 1.2. So you can play 2 to 7 players, which is also great because you can play with a bunch of people, and you can play it in like a half hour, 15 minutes, half hour. So Gnoming Around, Grandpa Beck game. There was another one that I played with my friends, but I can't remember what it's called. So I'll get that one next week. But as far as other picks go, one thing that I'm just going to pick, and it's more of an approach than anything else, I've just been completely buried with stuff going on in life these days. And so what I did is I actually sat down and I've been making a list of all the things that I need to do. And that way I can start to prioritize things and figure out when I'm going to get everything done.
That's called the to-do list. You should make an app for that.
Right. Yeah. The difference is once I can see it all in front of me, then I can start making decisions. Okay, this needs to be done this week. This can wait, this, whatever. So anyway, I'm going to pick that. And then finally, tomorrow is a holiday in Utah. So I'm just going to shout it out. It's Pioneer Day. And Pioneer Day commemorates when the Latter-day Saint pioneers entered the Salt Lake Valley. So, they come down out of Immigration Canyon. Brigham Young stands up. He's sick in his wagon, but he stands up and looks out on the valley and says, "This is the right place." So anyway, there's actually a "This is the place" monument up there where he came into the valley, and a bunch of my ancestors did that. It's funny, on my dad's side, a bunch of them came over that way, and on my mom's side, you go back 2 or 3 generations, and they all immigrated to the U.S. after that. So anyway, but yeah, I'm excited for it. Probably light some fireworks, and it'll be fun here in Utah. So those are my picks. Hadar, what are your picks?
I actually didn't prepare for that, so I'm not sure.
Just anything you're enjoying these days. Books, movies.
Hard to say. I don't know. Didn't prepare for that.
No, all good.
Yeah.
No worries. We got plenty between the three of us.
That's true.
For about 2 episodes.
Yeah.
Maybe you can just give us this then. What's the best part of living in Thailand?
So the best part in living in Thailand is the weather, the views, the chilling atmosphere. You can focus on what you want to do and get rid of all the things that you need to do that you are not willing to. And I said at the beginning of the episode, for people like us that, keep doing what they are good at, tech industry, I found this combination really, really nice, that you are living in a place which is not that developed, but you have an internet connection, you open your laptop and, you're in the central of whatever civilization, you close the laptop and you're in the middle of the nature.
Yeah. So one other question I have, I'm imagining that, so I have kids and so I'm thinking, gee, that sounds real nice, but is that even possible for someone in my situation?
I don't know the ages, but I also have 2 kids, 1.5 and 5.5, and it's working really nice. When they are at kindergarten, it's okay. Maybe later with schools, universities, things like that, maybe less. But in my ages, it fits us very well. Yeah.
Very cool.
So Chuck, my daughter just spent 2 years over there teaching, and she was teaching at an international school in Chiang Mai, which is up farther north than where Hadar was. But there are a number of schools like that, international schools where they're teaching primarily in English, and you'll get a lot of, American expats there for missions organizations or other NGOs or stuff like that who send their kids there. So when you're abroad, a lot of times they have schools like that where you can have your kids go to school.
Cool. Good deal. All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Hadar, I guess one other question is, where are you on the internet, on social media and stuff?
So you can find me at Myop.dev that you already mentioned, or at docs.myop.dev. We start creating a blog post there, so we're writing a little bit. And of course, LinkedIn. You can reach me at LinkedIn, send me a message, and we'll be in touch.
All right, cool. Well, let's wrap this up. Till next time, folks, Max out.
Adios.
Thanks, guys.